Tonight we have a local author and, as I mentioned, News Society board member will be sharing with us a bit of this. How many pages?
884.
884. And I said tome on just who, how, and they who created our public water supply that we enjoy here in Nevada City and the rest of Western Nevada County. We're going to learn about that because every time we turn the faucet, it really started with what he's going to be covering tonight. So, with that said, Don?
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming and thank you for supporting being interested in my book. I have to say I'm overwhelmed by how many people came tonight, so thank you so much. So as Dan started, so this is actually a no, actually you can have it back on. Yeah, that's perfect. Given the size of the book, this is actually a 15-hour lecture. I'm just kidding. Forgive me for rushing, but I want to try and just share some stories. As you can tell from the book, there's just lots of stories about Nevada City history, and I just want to share a few of those, some of my favorite parts of that, and we'll just talk about where it came from and a little bit about how I did the research as well. So the book really asks the question, where did the water come from? And so we can think about today about both from a gold mining perspective, it's not just about hydraulic mining, but up until electricity was widely available in like 1910, all of the local hard rock mines were entirely powered by Pelton wheels and water. So where did that water come from? So there's actually two sets of that. And then, even then, beyond that, what about all of the water we drink today? What about the farms and the irrigation? And so all of this leads up to what we see today with NID. So how many of you go out on walks on NID irrigation canals? You know what I'm talking about. It's my favorite place to walk a dog because it's nice and flat. So for those of you familiar, some of the locations. So for example, we've got the Snow Mountain Ditch and Cement Hill Ditch, Red Hill Canal, DS Canal, Cascade Ditch. So these are just the current NID managed flumes. But if you step back in time a moment, that represents there's an additional 100 ditches overlaid on here that go back to the gold rush, and actually that represents. So I've mapped out both with GPS and just out on maps themselves about 800 miles of local ditch here. But actually that only represents a small fraction of what's going on in Western Nevada County because I haven't mapped them all. And I'd say that probably represents maybe, I don't know, a third or a quarter of the ditches that are out there. So I don't even know how many we've got just in Nevada County. Never mind the rest of the foothills. So we'll get into, so first of all, sort of like, well, how was I doing some of this mapping? So I'm going to talk a little bit, mention a few times LiDAR, which is essentially it's an aircraft flying over, bouncing a laser off the terrain and the trees, and it can map everything incredibly accurately. And we were fortunate enough to the USGS did a survey of Northern California to provide a baseline for soil erosion for wildfires. So everything burns down, you get a flood and things wash out. You want to see what's happened to the. So using this, you can see on top of here, you see there's some white lines. Now a couple of these are old roads, but actually, so this is on Deer Creek. That's actually Pasquale Road there. So those are the ditches. And so the little white lines, that's how you can actually see that they're ditches, because they kind of follow the contours. So this is sort of how I've done some of the research. Other parts of the research, painstakingly going through transcribing legal cases in the Searles Library. Pat will show you a wall full of legal cases. Well, I spent quite a few weeks transcribing a couple of key lawsuits that actually led to the core content of some of the books here. So there's a lot of detail. So I'm just going to flit around a little bit, and feel free if you want to ask questions. Hopefully we won't run out of time too much, but happy to ask questions as we go through. Oh, we have a question already, you see.
Could we have the lights down?
Oh, there you go. All right. Okay, yeah. I give in. See, I can't see you now, but if you can you see that better now?
Yes.
There we go. All right. I need to keep you happy. There we go. Good. Okay, so let's talk about Nevada City. So first of all, how many of you have had somebody say, "Oh, you live in Nevada City, in Nevada? Right, cool." Yes, that's right. Yes, we're in California, actually. Yeah, and that rogue state. So did it steal our name? Well, so let's drill into that. So, well, first of all, I just need to say, for centuries, the area that is now known as Nevada City was called Utsuma by the Nissan people, and it's been Utsuma an awful lot longer than it was ever Nevada City. So you just need to remember that. But when the miners came along, they weren't very clued in with good names. So it was Deer Creek Dry Diggings, or Caldwell's Upper Store, because Caldwell also had a lower store, you see. So in 1850, the miners voted to get a better name, and they chose Nevada, basically snowy. But all the way from the beginning, Nevada City was always called Nevada City. The post office, the way it was incorporated, it was always called Nevada City. But it was the only place called Nevada, and so there was no confusion. So everybody just called it, it's like New York. Do you need to call it New York City? It's the same thing. And I'll just point out that Nevada City was really big in California. So even by 1859, it was twice as big as LA. Actually combined with Grass Valley, I should say. The Nevada City Grass Valley community. Twice as big as LA, twice as big as Stockton, twice as big as San Jose. So we were something. Let's not forget that. So there was no confusion until the Nevada Territory came along, and to be fair, in their records, they actually specifically say, "Oh, it was just a straw name for Sierra Nevada." It didn't actually say in the Nevada State Constitution, "We deliberately stole the name from." It just happened. But then to avoid confusion, everybody just started using Nevada City as the name. So that's how we firmed up with Nevada City rather than that. And I'll actually also point out that being an English guy, I am pronouncing Nevada wrong. I'd like to acknowledge that. Because it's, so would you like me, Jeffrey, you want me to say Nevada? Is that better? Okay, I'm sorry. And you can call me out on all any Englishisms as I go along, that's fine, I don't mind. Okay, so let's take a look downtown Nevada City. So we've got a few interesting things. So the first cabin built here was by Pennington. So that's just at the south end of the South Pine Street Bridge. And then the first family was Charlie Stamp and his wife Matilda, and I think they had a couple of kids. That was up Coyote Street on Washington Bridge. And then Caldwell's store is right here. That's later the site of Charles Marsh's house. So that's on Nevada Street at High Street, you know where that is. And then, some of the exact roads are a little bit, but then down at the bottom here, at the bottom of Broad Street, you've got two bridges. So obviously you can see where the freeway goes through now. And we don't have the Main Street Bridge anymore here, but, we don't have Main Street going across, but we have Broad Street. So you've got the two bridges there at Broad Street and Main Street. And this is what they looked like in 1851. So you got Broad Street going up here, and the bridge over Deer Creek, and that's Main Street going up with and so that's what it looked like. So where is that now? Well, so if you go to the Stonehouse Brewery parking lot, opposite Lefty's, or TJ's Roadhouse, and then look up the hill, then that's Broad Street, and that used to be Main Street going all the way up, but obviously that's now Nevada Street because it turns the corner and goes up the hill. But I just thought that was kind of cool, just seeing what it used to look like. So another different view, Coyote Hill. So this was an illustration of the Coyote Diggings, which were the Coyote Shaft was a round shaft that they used to dig down to get to the bedrock. And it was 2 or 3 feet across, and they used to throw the dirt out on either side. And so that's why they thought that looked like like the animal, like a coyote digging, a coyote hole. And that's how that got its name. But you can see that all the miners have the windlasses, like lowering buckets down to pull out the dirt. There's a lot going on. So a 30-foot square claim, and they might be digging down there. You could spend 4 weeks digging down 100 feet, find nothing. And the guy next to you would dig down 100 feet and sell his claim for $10,000. It's literally like neighboring claims. You never knew what you were going to get. So also on Coyote Hill, this is a fairly famous photo. I'm sure quite a few of you have seen this photo before from the California State Library. So this was actually one of the ditch company offices on Coyote Hill. So when you, after you bought some water for your mining, you need to go pay your water bill here. And that was one of the offices on Coyote Hill. And so this is what Coyote Hill looks like today. So this is the south end of Manzanita Diggings, so just above Highway 49 and then just west of Highway 20. So just near the intersection there. And just imagine that the hill was going up probably about, close to the height of those trees, was where that previous sketch was shown. And it took them about 15, 20 years, and they washed the whole hill away, and it's just left with the bedrock. It's pretty crazy, right? So we take a look here, and you can see that the pink area here is what they used to call the Coyote Range, and it was a set of hills that they had all of these different coyote diggings. So you can imagine each one of these hills looked like that sketch. And so you've got Coyote Hill, Pontiac Hill, Williams Hill, Buckeye Ravine, Buckeye Hill, and then there's the library today, Coyoteville, which was, so Coyoteville is separate from Coyote Hill, but it was a small town. It was nearly as big as Nevada City at one point. And then you've got Oregon Hill, and then American Hill, and Wet Hill, and it sort of carries on. So the whole of this was all those coyote mine shafts. And so let's take a look. So the Madeline Helling Library right here, right? So Buckeye Hill. What did that look like in 1852? So actually you can see, so this is near where the library is, and you can actually see that's Cement Hill in the background, kind of looking west. So log cabin, a couple of miners, they've got a sluice box, they're shoveling their pay dirt in here. So we actually know that this is William Morris Stewart and his partner, Dr. Merrick. We don't know much about him. He was a bit of a shady character. But Stewart was a pretty interesting guy. He ended up being the first senator for the state of Nevada. You can blame him for stealing the name, maybe. So, he was born in New York, but he grew up in Ohio. So Buckeye Hill, he was one of the Buckeye boys. So basically, so there's a large number of Ohioans from the Buckeye state that mined there, and they had 3 or 4 cabins. And so he was an active miner, but he realized that mining was actually quite hard work. So he switched over to becoming a lawyer, which is, I don't know. No offense to any lawyers here. So he pays well, and in fact, Stewart made various different fortunes from representing, competing mining claims. So one of the things, as DA of Nevada City, he actually prosecuted a very famous case. George Hall was found guilty and sentenced to hang for the murder of a Chinese man, Ling Sing. Crowd of eyewitnesses all said he did it, pretty much in cold blood, open and shut case. It was then on appeal at the California State Court that the court reversed the decision and Hall was set free. And they found that the eyewitnesses, their testimony was invalid, essentially because they weren't white. And so this set a legal precedent for decades in California that led to discrimination and abuse of the Chinese community. And particularly, nobody in the Chinese community can complain, like, for example, suing somebody, because anything they might testify wasn't then admissible in court. Leading up to and including the Chinese Exclusion Act and so forth, and all of these things that in California led to decades of wrongdoing. It lasted even up until World War II. So, but that trial that Stewart successfully prosecuted, led to a lot of things in the future. So when Stewart went to Washington, just before Stewart went to Washington, he actually became good friends with Niall Sills. So many of you here, I'm sure, well, apart from Sills Historical Library, might be a clue. We also have Sills Avenue. Judge Niall Sills was a district court judge here, and later on Chief Justice of California Supreme Court. He visited Stuart in DC, and Stuart says like, oh, would you like to meet the president? I can arrange a meeting. So they went along to the White House and presented their cards, and they got this message back. I'm engaged to go to the theater with Mrs. Lincoln. It's the kind of engagement I never break. Come with your friend tomorrow at 10. I'm glad to see you. Abraham Lincoln. Now, before you get going where you're going, as they were walking away from the White House, Lincoln was getting in the carriage to go to the theater, and he saw his friend Stuart. He ran over. He said like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late for the theater, I've got to go. But oh, who's your friend? Oh, nice to meet you, Mr. Searles. Thank you so much. I'd love to see you tomorrow morning. So Judge Searles was just tickled pink. He just was like, oh my goodness, you know, thank you, Bill. I've met the president. I shook his hand. I've heard him speak. I don't need to bother him tomorrow morning. It'll just be, I don't want to waste the president's time. That's right, I'll go. And so Stuart actually saw him off the railroad to go back to New York. But yes, that evening was April 14th, 1865, and indeed Lincoln was on his way to go to the Ford's Theater. So it turns out that note that he wrote to Stuart was the fourth to last thing Lincoln ever wrote. Stuart threw the piece of paper away because he didn't think it was important. Lots more about this story in the book, because that was only the beginning of the night's adventure, obviously, that took part in Washington, D.C. before we had a new president inaugurated. So, you know, Stuart went on to have a very successful and long Senate career. You know, one of his most outstanding and memorable things at this point was the fact that he actually wrote the 15th Amendment, which guarantees voting rights regardless of race, color, or previous enslaved status. And so obviously this was a ground-setting, a big precedent for at least guaranteeing universal vote. Well, at least for 50% of the population. It would take quite a few decades until 1921 for the 19th Amendment to come in to actually to give the other half of the population, the women, the right to vote. And of course, please remember that the 19th Amendment was written by another Nevada City lawyer, Aaron Sargent. Okay, so a quick little tour, you can get an idea. There's 35 biographies in the book, and they all have some stories that are nearly as good as that one. So, but let's talk about why water was so important for mining. So, right from the beginning, the gold rush, you know, people were finding gold in rivers. But as soon as the gold in the rivers ran out, they had to start searching around in the hills and the ravines, and they didn't necessarily have water. And so quickly, they got into the situation where they'd have to haul the pay dirt down to the water, or the water back up to their claims, and miners hated that. It was a big waste of time. Now, they had some new technology like the rocker. So this was actually something that was invented in the Georgia gold rush a few years earlier. So it could process gold about 2 or 3 times faster than a gold pan, but you needed a little bit more water. The next invention, actually, which was a Nevada City thing, was the long tom. So it was a forerunner of a sluice. It was basically a long board with some holes in it. Now you needed a constant supply of water to keep that running. And but it was very productive. It was about 10 times more productive than gold panning. But it would also lose some of the gold. You actually could lose 25 to 30% of the gold just running out the end. So not very efficient. So faster, but not very efficient. And then that led to the sluice box. And sluice boxes used to often be 300 or 400 feet long, all strung together with riffles or baffles in the bottom of a flume. And that would collect the gold as the water ran by. So they worked out it was a lot less work. All you had to do was shovel the dirt into a sluice box and the water did all the work. So then the next step of that evolution was, well, hang on, if the water's doing so much work, why do we have to dig? What happens if we point the water at the dirt? And so obviously that led to hydraulic mining. So history reports that Eddie Matheson first demonstrated hydraulic mining on American Hill on March 7th, 1853. Now, so if you think about where that was, so American Hill, it's a little bit nebulous. It's like, oh, I've got a house on American Hill. It's like, okay, actually it doesn't really tell me where in Nevada City you live, but it's somewhere there. So specifically in 1853, American Hill was, think about it as halfway between the county buildings and Hirschman Pond, north of Highway 20, somewhere around Cement Hill Road. So that was where American Hill was. And he got together with a miner called Anthony Chabot and a tinsmith called Eli Miller. And they put together a sewn and riveted hose, and they put a nozzle on the end of it. They used 16 inches of water. Oh, I should say, if I'm talking about the quantity of water, do people know what a miner's inch is? Okay, so that's basically like, think about a square area of that many square inches of water flowing through a hole. We'll come back to that because miner's inch is kind of important. So he was using 16 inches of water. Now, but the thing is, a year earlier, Chabot had actually been doing this for a year. He actually had a hose and he had a pressurized water box from a flume, and he was actually washing down gravel for a year before Madsen actually even got his, but he didn't have a nozzle on the end of his hose. So Madison's invention was the fact that he put a nozzle on the end of a hose that had already been used successfully for a year. But the thing is, Chabot, he was really good at anything he did. So he later went on to found various different water companies, city water companies in the Bay Area. He was so much so that he was known as the Water King. Anything down in the Bay Area that has the name Chabot on it, that's for this guy. Died a millionaire, had a good, happy life. So he's got all sorts of things going on without having to claim that he invented hydraulic mining. Madison, however, it's like he never made a cent from hydraulic mining. And he was a pretty good inventor. He invented a bunch of other things, but he never had any business sense and never was able to make any money out of these things. So he was broke, and people even in Nevada City even tried to look out for him to try and generate some charitable donations from California state legislature to recognize him. But he died broke. He was buried in Pine Grove Cemetery, and so poor he didn't even have a gravestone. So you don't even know where. So I think it's very right that he is recognized as the inventor of hydraulic mining because he didn't get much else for it. So you can see here it's an example of early hydraulic mining. We're used to seeing the huge, big monitors, North Bloomfield powering the water through cliffs. Well, this is what it looked like for the first 10 or 15 years. It was just hoses, coming down from a flume, and so 10, 11 guys could actually run this and wash down to the bedrock. So it's pretty interesting. But then, by 1870, it started getting big. So the exponential growth of water. So do you know the hydraulic monitor that's in Callanan Park downtown? I think it's a 12-inch nozzle. So just think about it, 12 inches wide. So, but that wasn't even the biggest. There was one that went to Blue Tent that was 18 inches across. And they couldn't even have had, they had a water supply of about maybe 1,000 inches a day at best. And so they could only run it for maybe an hour at a time because they'd have filled up this huge reservoir. It was it was like a 15-acre reservoir. And they could run that thing dry in an hour through this monster. Just incredible. So quite a few of the monitors, so the original monitor, the globe monitor was invented by Randolph Craig, who was a miner that worked and lived just west of Hirschman Pond. And so that was all a local invention. And many of those things were either cast in Nevada City or actually in Marysville. So all created locally. So do you get an idea about you might need some water? And that's before we even get to hard rock mining later on. So let's just talk quickly about some of the early ditches. So the first was the Mosquito Ditch, a tiny little ditch. Can you kind of see that there's an indent of a ditch going through here? So it was 18 inches wide, about a foot deep, 75 inches in capacity, so you could keep 10 long toms busy for a day. But boy, did they start making some money out of that. So you can see it went, Deer Creek's down here, Mosquito Creek, Fly Creek, and then Coyote Hill. And so if you want to see Mosquito Creek today, actually if you crawl up the bank on the second turn of Coyote Street, you can see it up there on the left-hand side. And then if you're going up North Bloomfield at the first corner, you can look up and there's like a U shape. That's Mosquito Creek, Mosquito Ditch from 1850, first ditch. And then they came to the Rock Creek Ditch. It cost $10,000 to build. They thought they were crazy. It's like, that's never gonna make money. Yeah, it paid for itself in 6 weeks. Crazy. So it was built by John Dunn and William Crawford, two merchants in Nevada City. And they got some advice from a civil engineer called Charles Marsh, who we mentioned earlier. Now, John Dunn was actually the person who coined the phrase miner's inch, because he was the first person selling the water out of the Rock Creek ditch. And you can see this is the Rock Creek ditch as it looks today off North Bloomfield Road. And you can see starts up here on Rock Creek, follows Cooper Road, and then follows North Bloomfield, and then Sugar Loaf, and ends up at this reservoir, big reservoir, just next to Sugar Loaf. And that's what it looks like. Well, I was going to say that's what it looks like today, but that's what it looked like last year. Actually, I think the photo's maybe 3 or 4 years old. But so big reservoir, or Sugar Loaf Reservoir, it was continuous operation from 1850. Unfortunately, due to leaks, it's been leaking for more than 100 years. NID actually decided to close it down last year, so it's actually looks more like a flat field now, which is a little sad. But that's what it looked like, and it's been in use for 170 years. Okay, so lots of other ditches I could skip over, but we don't have enough time, so I'm going to keep going, and there's lots of other things we can talk about. But I want to talk about the Snow Mountain ditches. Jeffrey mentioned that earlier, so it's one of my favorite walks in the neighborhood. Well, Snow Mountain ditches is actually 3 ditches. There's a Rock Creek ditch, there was an upper or little ditch, mainly because they ran out of money, and then there's the real ditch itself. And so if we take a look here, there's the Rock Creek ditch, so that's the original one, and then there's this new one. And then they dug the first half of the Snow Mountain ditch, and they got as far as Willow Valley, and then they ran out of money, mainly because this section here, 2 miles of flume, very expensive to build. It's nice and cheap to get a crew to dig a ditch, but not to build a flume. And so they ran up here, and they actually ran around and went all the way up here, up close underneath Caskey Road to Cold Mountain, Cold Spring Canyon, and that they could dig that old ditch without having to do any expensive flumes. And then from the money they got from selling that, they actually were able to then pay for the extra cost of building this out. And if you go to Scott's Flat, on the north side of Scott's Flat, anywhere along there, you see an old dry ditch. That's the old Snow Mountain ditch. That was in use until 1972. So this is what the little Snow Mountain ditch, it ended up just like as a top-up ditch that ran into Willow Valley Creek. And then here's what Snow Mountain ditch looks like just east of Scott's Flat. There's a part of a flume that sort of runs along there. That flume is probably from about 1950s, 1960s, and that was the main water supply into Nevada City right up until 1972. And you can see here there were 2 dams that held turned the water out of Deer Creek. And here's a picture from 100 years ago. There was a brand new 3-year-old concrete dam that they just put in. PG&E constructed that. 100 years later, it's still there. It looks pretty much the same. It's been abandoned for the last 50 years, but it's pretty cool if you want to go up there and take a look. And so Snow Mountain Ditch today, it's like, this is one of my favorite walks. It's just a wonderful, peaceful, shady place, and still supplies water to 2 other canals further on, and provides water for homes and farms. Okay, so my favorite stories here is about Amos Laird and his new ditch. So take yourself back to 1855. So Amos Laird at the time, he was one of the richest gold miners in Nevada City. Over the previous 18 months, he pulled out $500,000 worth of gold. Now that's before expenses, so it was probably still 70 or 80% margin. So he still made a lot of money out of that. So definitely one of the richest individuals in Nevada City. But he was fed up paying ridiculous amounts of money. He was paying something like $10,000 a month to the ditch company, to the water company, to get water out of the ditch, to provide to power the hydraulic mines and hydraulic cannons in his claims. So he said, okay, I'm going to build my own ditch. So he wanted to build an 8-mile ditch. So you can already see that it's getting quite busy there. So he managed to squeeze a ditch right in between, 8-mile ditch, and with a dam at Scott's Flat. And because the Deer Creek had so many other ditches pulling water. He had a new water right. He had no right to any of the water in there. It was already claimed many times over. But when there was a big storm, he could collect the runoff. And so he decided to build this reservoir, 100-acre reservoir. And so during the winter, he could fill that up, and then he'd never be able to get much water, plain water from the ditch, from the creek during the rest of the year. But he had a full reservoir. So a big reservoir up there in Scotts Flat, very much a precursor to the reservoir we have today. So you can see evidence of Laird's new ditch. This is what it looks like on Sugar Loaf Mountain and off Berger Road on the public land there. It's a pretty good sized ditch. It was used for quite a long time. So one of the big problems was that people were suspicious of that very large dam up at Scotts Flat. And they were really concerned about that amount of water. What would happen if that dam broke? So much so that the Nevada Journal said, if the dam should break, the slumberers in the lower part of the city would undoubtedly have rather a moist time. They added, I didn't have quite room for the quote here, but they added, but we will sleep very comfortably because we live in the upper part of the city. Well, 2 weeks later, it started raining. What we'd call an atmospheric river storm. We know what that was like. We had, 9 of them in January? Never mind the snow. So it had been raining for 3 or 4 days. And that dam and that reservoir up at Scotts Flat was getting fuller and fuller and fuller. And then at the middle of the night on February 15th, the wooden part broke catastrophically. And 600 million gallons of water started heading down Deer Creek. So eyewitnesses record seeing a tidal wave 15 feet high. So first of all, the river was already immensely high, right? You know what Deer Creek can look like if it's busy, or Yuba can look like when it's quite full. So imagine 15 feet on top of the storm level. Right? So it swept through, and all of the buildings down close to the river, close to the creek, pretty much in danger. So you may recognize where this is. So that's Stonehouse Brewery, and Lefty's on the right now, TJ Roadhouse. So that's the Nevada Street Bridge, used to be the Main Street Bridge. So the water came down there, and all of the debris backed up behind that bridge. And so the whole of that area started flooding several feet deep in just a few moments. And the water started lifting all of the wooden buildings off their foundation. And the bridge started lifting up its foundation. And then so it lifted up, and the water surged forward, and it slammed into the bridge, the Broad Street Bridge on the right. And then it backed up some more. And the Broad Street Bridge lifted up, and whole houses and 2 bridges, and half a hotel. So it was very interesting. The Monumental Hotel, which is on Main Street, it broke in 2. Half of it lifted up by the water, and the other half, completely intact, stayed exactly where it was. But 7 houses, the Monumental Hotel, and 2 bridges lifted up by the water and started floating down towards the rapids, hit all the boulders, and everything was all smashed up. Little bit of damage. So allegedly there was no loss of life, but I can't really believe that's necessarily true. There were many mining camps that were completely washed out. To give you an idea, there were 2 stamp mills down on Deer Creek, kind of down below where the South Pine Bridge is today. So they found some of the stamp mill pieces half a mile downstream. A lot of damage. So anyway, so Laird and his contractors got sued, about $10,000 in damages against him, but he appealed. And once again, the California Supreme Court came in and said, oh no, we don't like whatever you're doing in Nevada City, we're going to reverse that decision. And so the California Supreme Court found that Laird was not liable for his dam because he hadn't accepted, the dam wasn't finished, and he hadn't accepted the work. Now, interestingly today, it is California law and is known as the accepted work doctrine that contractors are liable for third-party injuries up until the time when the work is accepted. And that is a case law that was established in Boswell, as in Boswell and Hanson's Provision Store. That was one of the stores that got lifted up and floated down the river against Laird in 1857. And it's repeatedly been cited in modern cases, most recently in 2008. Needless to say, the Moore and Foss, they actually had the same lawyer as Laird, who promptly threw them under the bus, and they lost everything. Okay, so last big topic here, and then we'll get on to a couple of other little stories. South Yuba Canal. So the South Yuba Canal is still the main artery that delivers nearly all of the water to western Nevada County today. It provides water for about 30,000 homes and 3,000 farms in both Nevada and Placer County. And so it's about 16 miles long. Half of it's flume, or today pipeline, and about half ditch. So it was finished in 1857. So if you take a look, I'm not sure if you've been up to Lake Spalding. So this is 80, and that's 20, and then Lake Bowman Road here. Lake Bowman is somewhere up there. And that's Lake Spalding. So just below Lake Spalding's dam is where the South Yuba Canal starts. And then it comes down through Bear Valley Gap, traverses along the side of Bear Valley, goes through a little tunnel, and then winds its way through Steep Hollow Creek, and then ends up at a 3,000-foot long tunnel that breaks out into Deer Creek. And so that was, it was called at the time the largest engineering project in California's history. Now, you know, in 1855, it's not much history, but it was still impressive at the time. So where did it start? Well, it actually started, there was a company formed in 1851 by some Nevada City businessmen, specifically to go and build a South Yuba Canal. In fact, they had the company was called the South Yuba Mining and Sacramento Canal Company. Quite a mouthful. And they commissioned a survey by Captain John Day, a civil engineer from Grass Valley. And he worked out that it would be about 22 miles of ditch, and it would cost about $1 million. So in adjusted for inflation, you can roughly times that about 35. So, you know, about $35 million project, quite substantial. Now, this map, so obviously the company they formed, the idea was that they would raise money to do the construction by selling stock in the company. Those of you familiar with our history know that there were a lot of companies that essentially were money schemes. And so a lot of people thought that this was a money scheme, to the point where this map was actually created by a map maker in London to sell stock in Great Britain to anybody that would buy it, right? But the map is fascinating. So interestingly, that top piece here actually looks quite like the map I just showed you, right? So Lake Spalding would be about here, but then they just like, oh, well, Deer Creek just kind of runs down there, so we'll just run the water down there. They avoided mentioning the additional 36 miles of ditch to get to Nevada City, or the additional 45 miles of ditch to get to Grass Valley. Oops, oh, never mind. But what's great is that there's actually places on here, so it's a little too small to see, but that one says Round Tent. Nowhere called Round Tent. There's a place called Round Mountain, and there's a place called Blue Tent. Okay, they must have written it down wrong. Newtown is that one there, but Newtown's actually west of Nevada City. That's Nevada City. That's supposed to be Nevada City and Grass Valley, so you can see the topology is all. Anyway, so half of these yellow dots, they're all fictitious. They basically just put anything on this map just to try to sell some stock. Not sure really what's going on. Anyway, they dug 60 feet of ditch. Failed to raise any money, and nothing else happened. So, good try, guys. So instead, the Rock Creek, Deer Creek, and South Yuba Canal Company, that's the folk that they merged and combined from the earlier original Nevada City. These are the guys that had the monopoly on water in Nevada City. And they were going like, all right, we know what you're trying to do here, except we can do it. We actually have the money. Because, we have the monopoly on water, so we're making tens of thousands of dollars every month on water. So we can afford to build this. And so they started on January 1855. And this is part of the South Yuba Canyon, South Yuba River Canyon. And you see this is in 1884, so this is 30 years after they started. But they built a dam across here, and they had to, there's pretty much a vertical cliff here. They had to blast out 1.5 miles of ledge to basically put the flume on. And the first 60 feet was even harder because there was nowhere to blow it out because otherwise it would break up the dam. So they just dug a tunnel straight through from the dam. So that's a little shaft for going through the tunnel. And today, if you took this photo today, although it would be really hard to get to, you'd actually see in the background up here would be the Lakes Falling Dam. So that's to give you an idea of where it is. So a mile and a half of flume. So they had to, pretty steep cliff, they had to lower guys down on a rope, and then while they were hanging on the rope, they would manually cut holes, drill holes, pour in gunpowder, and then blast away to get to form the ledge, a mile and a half to put the flume in here. And they started at both ends, and they put people down in the middle, and they just got like a mile and a half. They blew that out, and it's anywhere from 100 to a couple of hundred feet above the level of the creek. It's some impressive things. It's not as impressive as I think you've probably heard of. There's these flumes that are actually on the vertical cliff wall. There's a couple of those in the Sierra Nevada, but this comes pretty close. And here's what it looks like today. So that's the modern pipeline. That section is actually still owned by PG&E, but NID recently bought the rest of the South Yuba Canal. But you can see it sits on the original ledge that they cut out in 1855. And then further down, you can see so along Bear Valley, there's 6.5 miles of flume, and this is the original. This had a flume sitting on it for 80 years. And then this is the modern flume that's replaced it. It looks in pretty pristine condition though. It's kind of fascinating. And then just talking about what the modern flume, it's just such a beautiful flume. It's just amazing. So if you go off Lake Bowman Road, there's the Sierra Discovery Trail. You can actually walk through the back of the trail and see what the South Yuba Canal looks like today. So this is what part of the ditch looks like. So it's 100 years ago, and I was able to find somewhere, I think it's actually the same spot 100 years later, which is just some lucky photography on my part, I think. And then there's the tunnel. So to get through to the Deer Creek watershed, they dug 3,000, nearly 3,100 feet of tunnel. It was 8 foot wide and 10 foot high. It used to have a flume running all the way through it. This is from an inspection report that NID did a couple of years ago. But some of the tunnel today is lined with concrete and timber to hold it up. But there's a good section of it that still looks exactly like it did when they finished digging it out in 1857. It's pretty cool. So the South Yuba Canal was finally finished in 1857 in November, and they were able to pour about 6,000 to 8,000 inches of water into Deer Creek. It's pretty much doubling the volume of water in Deer Creek at any given time. But because as soon as they put it into a public waterway, their competitors were more than happy to say, "Oh well, thanks for digging that canal. We'll take that extra water." It was part of their distribution systems. Like, thank you very much. So it took the South Yuba Canal Company another 4 years before they finally financially and personally crushed Amos Laird. And lawsuit after lawsuit, there's about 20 different lawsuits against Laird to acquire his mines, to acquire his ditches, before finally in 1861 he sold his share of his new ditch. And the South Yuba Canal Company finally had monopoly control over everything in Nevada City. Laird left for Montana, broke. So don't mess with these guys. So you can see on the left there the South Yuba Canal Company office. That was it's now the Chamber of Commerce next to the assay office. What was Main Street, and that was the South Yuba Canal Company's headquarters until 1880. So while we're looking around town, who knows what this building is?
Kidnapped the building.
Thank you. Oh, there you go. Yeah, you guys. So the Kid Knox building, brick building built just after the Great Fire. It was built a month after the fire in August 1856. And it had a dramatic hall for theatrical performances, and was also law offices. And particularly important for me, it's now a chocolate shop, because that's way more important now. Kid Knox. Oh, that's right. Captain George W. Kidd, president of the South Yuba Canal Company, and his investment partner, Dr. William Knox. He was a director of the company, but he was a little bit of a sleeping partner with the South Yuba Canal Company. You know, these are the guys that every time you look at that building, yeah, it was Kidd's response. Kidd specifically decided to take out Laird. You may have heard of another store owner called Hamlet Davis. One time, I think, famous store owner in Nevada City's early days, also crushed by Kidd and some of the actions they're doing. So not the nicest of fellows, but I've got biographies for each of these fellows and some really interesting stories. So Kidd later became the captain of a steamer, steamboats from San Francisco up to Sacramento, up to and including when one of his steamers, the boiler exploded, and more than half the passengers died in the explosion. Kind of a grisly story, but actually he actually developed some character and was a nice guy that day at least. So anyways, while we're talking about these guys, Charles Marsh, who popped up again. So what do we have to thank Charles Marsh for? Oh, sorry, excuse me first. Who knows what this is? Exactly. So there is Central Pacific Railroad President Leland Stanford, former governor of California, future U.S. senator. So he's holding the mallet that struck the last spike. So apparently, when he went to strike the golden spike, he missed the first time. But not to be outdone, the president of the Union Pacific Railroad, who took the next stop, also missed. So you're pretty sure that neither of those gentlemen had actually ever swung anything in their life. So right, just a little to the left of Stanford, there's our friend. So Charles Marsh was one of the co-founders of the Central Pacific Railroad. 6 months before, Leland and the other members of the Big Four invested in his company that would then become the Central Pacific Railroad. Marsh stayed on as a director. He was also one of the engineers for the Central Pacific Railroad. But as the Nevada County's first surveyor, he actually surveyed personally out in the field about half of the ditches that we've been talking about. But the thing we really need to remember him for, and frankly thank him for, is his fire protection proposal in 1860. So there had been so many fires, 6 major fires that had taken out most of the city, not to mention tens of smaller fires. And so finally, nobody had done anything about it. Marsh was like, all right, this is the infrastructure you need. This is where the pipes go, this is where the fire hydrants go, this is how much water pressure you need. I mean, it's ridiculous. By 1860, they had been using hydraulic mining for, 7 years at that point? What's that? Oh, you mean a hose with water that you aim at something? Is that good for anything else, like in town? I don't know. No, of no importance at all. And so this was actually the first serious effort. And so the proposal was voted on and succeeded. The miners' foundry in Nevada City couldn't produce the spec of high pressure pipes that Marsh wanted. And so it was actually ordered in from Philadelphia with some newfangled hydrants, fire hydrants from New York. But he also built a 1.2 million gallon city reservoir. That is, so there's think about the libraries there, and then we've got the reservoirs just up behind it. So that was all finished in 1861. Sadly, that wasn't the last citywide fire. So in 1863, there was another fire, and the firefighters, so it was during that time that both of the firehouses in Nevada City got set up and fully funded and full of equipment and everything gets going. They opened the fire hydrants to discover that they're dry. And so basically they tried as hard as they could, but the city basically burned down. And they found afterwards that somebody had closed the valve between the city reservoir and the hydrants. The fire department hadn't checked that the equipment worked, and the South Yuba Canal Company, or Marsh, had basically like, hey, this is your stuff, not mine. It's like, who's to blame? Oh, both of you, frankly. So Marsh's Pond today. So we have Marsh's Pond, so that was the first city reservoir that was built for the fire protection. They added a second one down below that's now a baseball field. But that's what that looks like today. So with that, I hope I've just given you a few little stories about Nevada City's history. So I think we only talked about, probably only talked about 5 ditches. There's 100 up here, and I've written about quite a few of them. And if you're interested in them, first of all, thank you for all of you that have been shown interest and bought my book. I very much appreciate it. I think you realize it's like, while selling my book is a great thing, I think you realize I'm not trying to make money out of it. So that's wonderful. But what I wanted to do is I want to share all of this history with you. So the website nevadacityhistory.com has all of the maps. So all of the maps that are in the book and all of the maps that you've seen here. So if you can go in here, you can actually just choose your neighborhood and actually just drill down and see, hey, are there any old mines here? There's 3,000 mines that are actually you can show up on here. There's a mine everywhere. But along with that, just where it's been hydraulic, so you can see the LiDAR data. It just pops out where anywhere places where it's been hydraulic. And then if you've got a ditch going through your backyard, if you live in Willow Valley, you probably have a ditch going through your backyard. Jeffrey lives in Willow Valley. As soon as I found out Jeffrey's address, I'm going like, okay, I can tell you the 2 ditches that go through your yard. So if you're interested in hearing more about the stories, go check out the website, have a look at the book. But if you ever have any questions, my contact information is on the website. So if you want to ask me about any questions about this, follow up, or I'll come and look at historical remains anywhere in the county. It's all super exciting. So with that, I want to thank you very much for your time, and we'll answer a few questions.
Most of the ditches?
Have I traversed most of the ditches? No. No, I know a few people who work at NID, and some of them are perhaps former ditch tenders, and those are the guys that you want to congratulate and say thank you, because particularly during the winter. But no, I mean, so in doing some field research, I plotted about 10,000 GPS points. Over the years. I used to say to my wife, it's like, I'm going out ditching, and me and the golden retriever basically just go out and, looking for old ditches, so yeah.
John Spalding.
John Spalding.
Built Spalding Reservoir, 5,000 acre feet for Alpha Vegas. And the old ditch goes down the south. And then when they built the new dam, they did the tunnel, the South Yuba Canal, to get water to the Deer Creek House.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so the comment there was Spalding put together well, it was already under construction, but the lake that became named Lake Spalding in John Spalding's honor. He was the superintendent of the successor South Yuba Canal Company, and they actually had two goes at the dam. The later dam allowed them to raise the height of that to allow extra hydroelectric generation later.
That water ends up in Folsom Lake.
That's right, yeah, and so that's right. So you think about all of the water that comes down the South Yuba Canal, it ends up today in Deer Creek and in South Yuba River or in Bear River, and then it ends up down in the valley.
What year did NID start?
So the question was, when did NID start? So actually, I have, there's a chapter about NID at the back of my book. So NID people started to get an idea about building an irrigation district just around the end of World War I. But it took about 5 years until 1926 for NID actually to come together. And they spent years haggling and negotiating with PG&E. So the way that NID came into being was that essentially through eminent domain, they are able to gain ownership of all the water rights in Nevada County. And then once they do that, they basically, the negotiation with Pacific Gas and Electric was, okay, so you're using our water to generate electricity. We would like some money, please. But it took, PG&E negotiated for years and years and years before they actually signed the contracts to give NID some revenue, which then actually allowed them to start doing development. So for example, building the Deer Creek Reservoir, building the DS Canal, Chicago Park Canal, etc., getting water down to the south part of the county. It was just through the relentless negotiation of all the RISCA that NID happened. Yeah, good question, yeah.
So there's a remnants of ditches up at Conservation Camp Road as you drive down toward Rock Creek intersection, and they kind of traverse that land heading down toward Rock Creek Ditch.
Yep.
Can you tell us anything about that series of ditch? And if your answer is by the book, I understand.
Yes, by the book. Go to the website. So go to the website. So what we got here. So what we're talking about is actually it's a little bit off the map here, but if you go to the map there, you will find the Ridge Ditch and the Blue Tent ditches go through there, and they cross across the top of Rock Creek, and they provided water primarily to Blue Tent.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and then the Ridge Ditch is the blue one here, going all the way down, providing mines to the Harmony mine and so forth through the 1890s.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So you touched a little bit on the water rights and existing water rights. So how did they work it out originally to, the original water rights? You have all these companies competing. I mean, how did they work that out?
So the question was, how did they work out the water rights originally? And the quick answer is, they weren't very good at it, and it usually ended up in court. So this is one of the reasons why the water companies often combined really quickly, because they worked out that competing with lawsuits was pointless. So I actually had, there's a whole chapter in my book about the lawsuit between Kidd versus Laird, and it's in trying to take down Amos Laird. The South Yuba Canal Company were trying to prove that Laird was misusing his water rights. But the thing is, what the South Yuba Canal Company was doing was they were stealing water upstream so that it looked like Laird had all the water. And they used to drop it back down, halfway down the ditch, back into Deer Creek so they could bypass other people's dams. So it's very clear what the water rights were, but they weren't interested in exactly what they were. They were interested in getting the water to where they wanted it to go and then selling it. And every gallon, every miner's inch of water that you had is an inch that the other person couldn't sell. And so they didn't get on very well. Jeff?
A lot of money was made on gold, but how much money was made on selling water?
Very good question. So a lot of money was made on gold, but what about how much money was made on water? So if you go back to the owners of the South Yuba Canal Company, one of them died a millionaire. The others didn't actually do particularly well. So there was a lot of money that I frankly think went into very good lifestyles and also into very dodgy business investments. And so they made, for the 15 years after the South Yuba Canal was finished, they were bringing in, it was about an 80% margin business. So, for every dollar they brought in, on 20-cent costs, they were making a lot of money. But they then, went into lots of different, Kidd paid for the construction of 2 different steamships on this, to run between San Francisco and Sacramento. Tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars going into these other businesses. So they took their money and they had very good lifestyles, but then they invested in lots of other businesses that didn't necessarily work out.
How did the ditches evolve into the pipelines that were providing water to the major mines?
Good question. So how did the old ditches evolve into the pipelines, or actually the ditches that provided water for the hard rock mines? So there's a transition. So when hydraulic mining ended in 1884 with the Sawyer decision, the South Yuba Canal Company had already switched its business model to starting to sell to hard rock mines. And they realized that investing in Pelton wheels, or in Pelton wheel-driven industries was actually going to get them there. They knew the Sawyer's decision was coming. It was just a question of when. And so between 1882 and 1884, the South Yuba Canal Company's revenue dropped to a quarter of what it was, because all of their hydraulic mining customers, it's all illegal. But by the following year, they were back up to about 2/3 of their previous revenue, because they started digging new ditches and providing water to the hard rock mines, and they charged them at twice the rate that they used to charge the hydraulic mines. Now, to Steve's question there, is like, what, you know, how does there was a new set of ditches. So the Idaho ditch, which went to the Idaho mine, the Cascade ditch, which was also dug for the Idaho mine, but then also later provided water for the Empire mine, and North Star Powerhouse, for example. And so all of these then developed, and they had more of the technology to do high pressure pipes. So they did ditches wherever they could, but then to cross ravines, you just do an inverted siphon using a high pressure pipe, and you could get to a lot of other places. So it was really a development through from the late 70s until into the 1890s, when the water was all about the hard rock mines.
Do you have plans to extend your research further into South County?
Do I have plans to do further research into South County? So I'm not sure about that. This represents about.
I saw your wife going.
Yeah. So probably not. The maps actually extend out. It goes out. There's quite a few other ditches in a lot of different other places, but the depth of research that I got into, it's quite time consuming. So I needed to focus somewhere. So if I even included too much about Grass Valley, it would be a larger book. Yep, and then I'll come at you.
They raised Lake Spalding 40 feet. So you're talking about the South Mountain ditch. So the South Mountain ditch now comes out of the Diaz Canal to the siphon. Goes across Deer Creek. So they did away with the South Mountain ditch where you're showing the dam.
That's right, yeah. So, yeah, very good point. So in 1972, they cut off the top half of the Snow Mountain ditch, and they replaced it with water from the Cascade ditch going across the siphon across here. And then actually later at the time, they then rebuilt the Cascade ditch so that all of that was actually pipelined as well. So all the way from just the bottom half of the Snow Mountain ditch is our beautiful old ditch. And the rest up here is all dry, and then even all of the section of Cascade ditch is all dry up here because it's all got replaced. But you know, things keep on evolving.
So after hard rock mining, then soon steam and electric came in. How did that affect the water system?
Yeah, so the question was, how does steam and electric affect, particularly the hard rock mines? Well, this is a really tricky thing. All of the hard rock mines, so they had hoists, and they had the mill, basically the stamp mills, and everything needed a lot of water power from kelp fields. So they all had a steam engine backup. But the thing is, they realized that, so literally the Idaho mine, the Eureka mine, which was next door to the Idaho mine, literally closed in the 1870s because of lack of fuel for the steam engine. So by the 1870s, people talk about how the fact that it was clear cut for 8 miles around the Idaho mine. So the closest timber they could get for fuel. So they needed something ridiculous. I can't remember if it was 20, 25 cords of wood a day. I mean, it's basically, it's 3 large trees a day in cords. And so they, early on, it's kind of like, oh, there's a tree over there, let's take that. And then the next year it's like, oh, it's a mile away, and it was 3 miles away. So the hauling costs were just ridiculous, 8 miles. And so to bring in water, first of all, you can fire the 2 guys that run the steam engine, right? It's a pipe pointing at a Pelton wheel, and it just keeps running. You need somebody else to turn it on and turn it off, and that's it. You pay for the water and you're done. And so getting water in to power all of the mines was a no-brainer. It was taking out, in some cases, a quarter to a third of the operational cost of the mine of switching to water power. And so when electricity came along, so during the early 1890s, they were all about electric lights. I mean, that North Bloomfield, all of that was lit with arc lamps years before Edison came up with the incandescent light bulb. So they were working, North Bloomfield was night and day with arc lamps. So the problem is that electric motors weren't powerful enough to drive the hoists and to drive the other things. And so it wasn't until 1910 or so that mines started switching over to electric power, because at that point PG&E could provide reliable service. It was hydroelectric, and the motors were actually powerful enough to replace machinery in the mines. And at that point, water was just used for steam backup and fire protection. Right, maybe one more question.
So that was the last time that PG&E delivered reliable service?
Correct. Yeah, you'll notice that my in going through my book, the comparisons of the fact that one monopoly at the South Yuba Canal Company led directly to another monopoly that uses the same infrastructure. The irony and bitterness there is not lost, believe me. There we go. I think with that.